imperial hegemony in the 19th century. And for that, we have amongst us Piyasha Dash. Piyasha Dash is an undergraduate student of comparative literature from Jadavpur University. Research interests include various forms and media of art, culinary studies, and particularly how these art forms from different periods engage with the audience. She's a professional painter who tries her hand at various painting mediums and has experience participating in cooking competitions. She has presented a few papers on Bengali cuisine, African paintings, and cinema at some international conferences. She has a few forthcoming book chapter publications with international publishing houses. So we are looking forward to a very engaging session and may now request Vyasha to take over the session formally and begin with the presentation.
Okay, hello, am I audible?
Yes, you
Yeah.
are audible.
Thank you so much, Victorian Vanguard, for giving me this opportunity to present my research here. And I would like to share my PPT. Okay. Um, Thank you for being patient. And I would start by saying that I'm engaged with painting from a long period of time. And as I also have an inclination towards food, I wanted to merge both the mediums together and work on it. And I came up with this idea of how I will like incorporate both of these in my paper. So my paper is mainly about examining the food habits of the Victorian era as a key mechanism of imperial hegemony, with the help of some famous paintings like the Afternoon Tea of 1876 and the General Post Office 1860. So, the primary motive will be to understand how food became a symbol of power, elegance, as well as civility, but at the same time, how the colonial dining rituals excessively strained the idea of refinement and etiquette when they were enforced upon the society. So, I shall start. Food is not only bound to provide nutrition to the body, but also is the means through which people engage with each other in a particular society. Exploring diverse cuisine can lead to acquiring vivid knowledge about the traditions, social structures, as well as the preparations, which can reveal the gender roles and the power dynamic of that particular community. I'm sorry for the inconvenience. Um, okay. So, food acts as a symbol of social status, identity, and especially a cultural mechanism to understand the historical background of a particular time. People have always used food in their attempts to climb the social ladder themselves and to push other people down the ladder. According to Mendel, having a social status higher than the other was one of the significant things because with food choices came social recognitions and with that came respect and honor. This was also when it came to the topic of using particular cutleries. Fancy silverware, glassware, and even napkins were considered symbols of higher class people in society. Moreover, the dresses people wore while having the food were explicitly royal, such as a tea gown for an afternoon tea. Depiction of food were used in paintings to portray royalty, wealth, and class of the British in the Victorian era. Moreover, food acts as a mediated mechanism for negotiating class aspiration, moral regulation, and colonial mimicry within the middle class society. The performance of identity and status through the presentation of formal etiquette, dining habits, and consumption of particularly imported food items became the marker of social distinction. This was prominently seen in the British colonial elite society of Bengal, where people adapted the English stews, roasts, and that specific culinary renovation became the expression for the bourgeois to portray their cosmopolitan identity while being intact to their heritage, followed by the concerns of hygiene and cleanliness that entered the kitchen with the help of the British ideologies, and it gave rise to the concept of a sacred space for all the middle class people, women, to promote their nurturing qualities. The bounty lifestyle was often showcased in a still life arrangement, conveying moral and social messages. Some painters even used symbolic elements like wine, nut, or fruits to represent concepts of time and religious themes. A wave of changing role of food in art during that period was seen frequently to highlight the beauty of everyday elements and lifestyle. Some paintings portrayed the labor behind the preparation of a particular food item, harvesting of the farmers, serving of the food by the housemaids, and the significance of domestic spheres at that period of time in the lavish houses of the higher class people. In the Victorian era, the families started enriching themselves in the development of their economy and commerce, which led to rapid evolution of their dining etiquette too. The society designed itself in such a way that people who did not know how to use a fork would be downtrodden immediately from that particular community or gathering. Table decorations with candles, flowers, and other accessories became necessary for the classy and elite look people wanted while having their afternoon tea or a huge gathering for Christmas. During the 19th century, the inclusion of jelly amongst the other food items was increasing because of the fruity flavor and the shiny, jiggly texture of it, even though it was made from boiled calves' feet. The industrialists were so eager to come up the ladder of that societal hierarchy that they accepted these things quite happily. Many social qualitative researches on food consumption have shown that the higher class people follow the dietary recommendations than those who cannot afford them. Hence, the below middle class people cannot align their food habits to the dietary restrictions and prescriptions which are to be followed to have a healthy lifestyles, leading to various diseases and illnesses, as well as most likely to face the intensive wave of famine the most than the other social groups. In this country, the stronger hierarchy of social classes may have a larger on the lifestyle than on the continent. Food was used as an economic, social, and political statement by some contemporary artists and by political. It meant that feministic views, to be precise. In the ancient times, paintings consisted of both the depiction of food and the ingredients such as vegetable pulp and spices like turmeric, which were used as colors. From the Egyptian hieroglyphic tablets, consisted of the pictography of crops and millets to the famous painting of Renaissance, like the Last Supper, 1498 by the globally recognized Leonardo da Vinci, and The Gardener, 1590, by Giuseppe Arcimboldo, depicting overflowing of a black bowl of fruit, shows how the symbolism have changed following the ritual and cultural factors which gave those artworks a meaningful outcome even in the present times. This paper examines literal symbolism of the minute aesthetic details in the paintings of George Goodwin Kilburn's Afternoon Tea and George Elgar Hicks's The General Post Office 1 minute to 6. Both paintings belonging from the Victorian era might contribute in the further researches on food and culture by delving into the depiction of the cuisine that were served, the attire in which the elites of that period used to attend their evening teas, and especially how the middle class people struggled to be a part of that social stratum by adapting their culinary habits and way of living. To understand the complications of these paintings, this paper methodologically incorporated the theories of Pierre Bourdieu and Homike Bhabha. As the research is on artistic representation of two Victorian paintings, it is important to know the historical background of that time as well as the views of some renowned sociologists who successfully associated both culinary habit and class structure with precision. Food is not only about taste but also about an individual's social position in their society with the way their view of class gets aspirated through colonial moral regulations. Pierre Bourdieu worked on this social concept and gave his theory of taste to delve into the notion that it is not merely about wealth, but but the minute as well as complex presentation of the elites. Moreover, he focused on the cultural capital that is the style of communication, attire, eating habits, and more, instead of just addressing the economic capitalism. In his book Distinction, A Critical Judgment on Taste, 1979, he moved beyond the literal connotation of the word taste and incorporated it with the reflection of how social classes act as a means of competition and strategy. Meanwhile, identity and preferences are also an integral part of social taste, which drives one to their goal of reaching a social and cultural level in the hierarchy of the society. On the other hand, Homike Bhaga associated food and eating habits with the nuances of the post colonial studies and gave the literary space a new dimension of connecting different platforms to identify a single frame through various perspectives. His concept of hybridity and colonial mimicry aligns perfectly with the research aspect of this paper. Thus, his of mimicry and man 1984 is used as another lens through which the authoritative discourses of the Western people will be depicted, which gave rise to the concern about aesthetics, representation of an individual's status in the society that was not only physically but also psychologically embedded. Pierre Bourdieu distinction. Uh, the French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu wrote a seminal theory on distinction and taste in the year 1979, where he examined different forms of art, consumption, and how an individual's culture is intertwined with those aspects and reinforces social distinction delving into class differences and inequality. The primary argument of this theory was to identify the cultural preferences that are not merely personal choices, but are the representation of one's class and social structure, which also generated a new identity and way of living for them. Being a sociologist, his work did not only consist of empirical studies, but also various theoretical researches from different disciplines like anthropology, cultural studies, and more. This became a medium for people to associate culture with power from the other side of the table. Bourdieu's habitus gave insights about life experiences and how it affects one's habit, their way of perceiving the world, their taste and influences. Therefore, an individual's taste in food, music, art, and other cultural good is not innate, but is a reflection of their society and social preferences that can be easily distinguished by class distinctions. Suppose a child grew up in an elite family where he was introduced to jazz music from a very young age. They will automatically lean more towards that type of music, but this is the same case for food and art. Whereas a child from a lower class family will only focus on what is necessary for their living. Thus, a social hierarchy is automatically created. Prominently later, it was seen that the middle class family tried to bring change in their way of living as well as eating rituals to fit in amongst the colonizers and preferred the Western culture more, which made their social status to evolve at a better place. There also lies a symbolic violence that is created by the upper class people by imposing of their refined tastes upon the commoners and the other classes as a norm or value for their living. And hence, an internalization takes place into the subordinate groups. The I is a product of history reproduced by education. Here, Bourdieu wanted to state that the ability to perceive and appreciate a piece of art highly depends on the type of past experiences and type of education one has received. The concept of aesthetic disposition gave rise to the act of acknowledging art not as a practical object but for the form in which it exists, especially the appearance alone. He also theorized how the intellectualist theories contradicted the artistic viewpoints as well as the experiences of various art lovers. The reception of art depends on the upbringing of an individual too. As it comes naturally to a child, if they are taught about the certain subject by their family members as well as it requires a break from ordinary life, also the knowledge of art history is to be acquired by the viewers, as without knowledge, it would be difficult for them to grasp the real meaning and motive behind it. There's an impactful difference between popular aesthetics and pure aesthetics, which also creates a great distinction between the two classes of people and their way of receiving the artwork. For example, a middle class person will seek a linear way of storytelling, whereas people who look for pure aesthetics will focus on the form and style instead of the linearity of the story and the teller. When any artistic representation is considered, it does not only include art but also different forms of cultural media like photographs, artifacts, and more. This aspect was needed for this research paper to be studied on as a few Victorian paintings which depicted both food and famous English attire of the elite people of that period will be analyzed through the lens of Bourdieu's judgment of taste to have an idea about what taste looks like. Omike Bhabha is a prominent post-colonial theorist who worked mainly on the post-colonial literary concept and cultural studies, where he openly challenged the traditional ideas and beliefs about an individual's cultural dynamic, identity, and power structures. Bhabha is in his seminal essay on the man and their way of mimicking the colonizers had gained a lot of attention and has introduced the lens through which psychological relationship between the colonizers and the colonized could be understood vividly. The nature of colonial mimicry is a lot more contradictory than it has two sides like a coin. In the context of literary history, colonial mimicry gave rise to a new genre of writing, and it led to transmission of new literary creation of that respective time period. On the other hand, a vivid depiction of Babu culture in Bengal was noticed due to impact of this type of mimicry, as the higher and middle class people of the country's capital were highly influenced by the colonizers, which further led to discrimination and certain expectation to meet the norms of cultural hybridity. According to Bhabha, essay of mimicry, the colonizers desire the other to be almost the same as them, but not quite like them. It was the white man's responsibility all the way to civilize the colonized people by encouraging them to adopt the colonizers' way of living, education, and manners. For example, in dressing up for a party, to know what a party was itself and their etiquettes. The authoritative nature of the colonizers were noticeable while the native people tried to adapt and settle, facing all the discrimination that came along with that particular process. Ambivalence was the result of all such things. Thus, the people went through various changes, and duality was one of them, especially being at the heart of the colonial discourse of that particular time of colonization. There lies an extremely racist comment regarding mimicry and certain communities, which were usually decided by the other members of their group to insult the people who supported the process of copying the colonizing powers. Such comments consisted of the words coconut to describe brown people who mimic white people, and Oreo for black people for the same attribute of copying. Thus, it was proven that cultural identities were not fixed but are constantly transitioning through the process of hybridization, which was later critiqued by a lot of people. The colonized countries showed the importance of inheriting the binary system of thought. Some prominent references of hybridization are the introduction of food fusion, language, art, and other aesthetic discourses. Haber also argues that the process of mimicry can act as a subversive force to destabilize the colonial authoritative power by revealing the unauthenticity of the power system. Mannerism introduced by the British to the Indians, and how the Indians have used this concept of mimicry in their literary endeavors shows what actually intention and identity do to an individual. Even if mimicry is considered a derogatory thing, the colonizers not only conquered our lands but also our minds to behave and live life in a certain way to attain class and sophistication. Food is considered one of the most pleasurable things on earth, and thus there lies no surprise in the fact that food items like fruits, vegetables, meat, and more were common aspects in paintings and artifacts from the Greco Roman period until today. The Romans enjoyed feast, keeping in mind that food items are associated with specific god and goddesses. For example, grapes were for Bacchus, who is known as the god of wine, and Vesta is associated with grain and baking, as she is the goddess of hearth and home. Religious offerings were made to keep the spiritual relationship between human and divine intact. Surprisingly, their floor mosaics symbolize food crumbs on the floor after the feast, whereas the fresco painters who painted on the ceiling of the churches used depictions of various culinary motifs in spiritual contexts and scenes related to them. Evolution of both the preparation and the consumption of food is a unique factor in the artistic measures as the kind of food and how it was eaten with cutlery or fingers made the social and cultural background of that depicted characters more vividly, and also the historical influence became accessible to people even without any manuscript or text. Artists use various strategies to represent their cultural identities, such as appropriation and hybridization of symbols, personal narratives, and cultural criticism and interventions. Cuisine in the Middle Ages was lavish and was laden with variety of birds and meat. The aristocratic family tend to focus on their expanded appetite, and primarily people suffered from obesity through the although the poorer grew hungrier than in previous eras. Astoundingly, these notions were used in different paintings and were intertwined with the concept of morality. That is, the sequential paintings had the depiction of the rich person ending up in hell, whilst the poor one goes to heaven. Johannes Vermeer is one of the recognizable painters from the Dutch Baroque painting period, yet he was known distinguishably as his creations consisted of valuable pigments, both vibrant and earthy colors, and the drama he incorporated with the effect of light and shadow in the paintings. The Milkmaid, one of his ultimate paintings, had the grace and portrayal of class awareness that very few lavish Dutch still life paintings acquired. But there lies a contrast between these Dutch paintings and Victorian paintings that depicted food as a notion of people's identity. Dutch paintings were mainly still life based portraits, which highlighted the morality and wealth of the community around the 1700s, whereas the Victorian period was 100 years apart from the Dutch Baroque period, thus fell under the narrative genre by reflecting the contemporary interests of an individual's life and social stances. The diversification noticed in the Victorian painting was unmatched and dealt mainly with the scenic configuration of one's everyday life, predominantly landscapes and portraits. Another interesting fact about illustration of food was the type of painting that were incorporated in the cookery books. Elaborate description about cakes, puddings, and a whole depiction of an elite feast were some things that made the audience focus on the social rituals and innovation in the system of dining. Also, the priority was totally upon the concept of realism, neglecting the heavy complications of religious symbolism, unlike the Dutch paintings. The evolving food supplies of Great Britain helped the artists to include newer appetizing items like coffee, sugar products, and tea, giving rise to the evening tea culture of the aristocrats. The primary subject of the Victorian social illustration were the higher and lower classes, and especially the major distinction between them. These paintings serves as the representation of a person's prestige in society and their position in the social hierarchy. Nonetheless, the oil paintings were hung on the side walls along with vignettes of dead animals like rabbits, birds, and these were because the activity of poaching were prevalent among the elite classes of the society. The eyes were more pleased by the extravagant feast with ultimate unlimited courses of food in the gatherings hosted by the wealthy people of the society. These upper classes controlled the unfortunates of the society to seize their land in England and other grounds for the purpose of hunting. Thus, the peasants who served the upper classes were facing problems from economic issues along with their livelihood aspects, as their living depended on the slaughtering of explicit animals. The Afternoon Tea by George Goodwin Kilburn, 1876. This painting of 1876 is a classic reference to a Victorian domestic genre painting. George Goodwin Kilburn used richly elegant interiors, patterned wallpapers, velvety pillows, mirrors, carpets, and fine porcelain as notions of refinement and leisure preferred by the higher class people. An upper class woman holding a teacup and saucer in an elegant evening gown, having tea, portrays tea as an act of civility, imperial identity, and moral order. Tea also depicted disciplined consumption and distinction between two classes. The evening tea culture of Bengal indirectly emerged through the imperial hegemony, elite aspiration, and vernacularization of the British. It became a way for the Indian elites to be properly aligned with the imperial notion of civility and superiority through moral conduct. This particular idea can be denoted vividly using the theory of Gramscian hegemony, which defines how a ruling class maintain their dominance over others not only through external changes but also by embedding the bourgeois values as common sense in the human psychology of the civil society. Another historical background of the colonial power can be noticed from the porcelain dishes that trace the global networking capacities of the British, mainly the connection between India and China. The evening gown consisted of soft tones, laces, and patterns which were common in Victorian times, and most of the feminine dresses had these structured textured elements to show the British inclination towards nature. Kilburn's art style was known for his sentimental realism while intensifying the Victorian values in the 19th century painting. One of the well known painters of India, Raja Ravi Verma, learned the painting techniques from the European academic realism for his composition of domestic spaces with detailed interiors and refined depiction of texture of a character's attire. Therefore, the colonial mimicry of domestic leisure in the 19th century, which became a sign of civility and class, can sometimes be inferred through some Indian aesthetic context too. The features of the painting seems tranquil, but are very carefully regulated and thus can portray Victorian order, everyday rituals, and taste through a visual performance, giving the audience an idea not only about an individual woman but a whole society. The General Post Office by George Elgar Hicks, 1860. The painting of 1860 portrays a bustling London post office depicting a Victorian genre painting. It is a suitable visual reference for the duality present in the attire of the character that directly articulates imperial modernity, social distinction, class and order, and civility. The attire functioned as the visual connotation of the paintings to support the idea of bourgeois discipline and hierarchy. As the dining rituals and appearance in the 19th century functioned as a mechanism of civility and moral regulation, the clothing of the attendees became a medium of representation and hegemony by producing visible distinction while presenting the aesthetic order. Amongst the well dressed figures, the women with a green velvet cloak at the front depicted Victorian modesty, and all the other elements like the glove, layered clothing, and structured silhouettes vividly showed the notion of respectability. In contrast, the clerks and laborers were shown in simpler garments and rather in a less structured and loose tailored attire with the muted colors. The notion of physical labor was reinforced not only through the clothes but also through their bodily movement and stature. Hicks tried to naturalize the social distinction through the visual performance of both the dynamically different classes, that is, by linking bodily movement with utility and elegance with moral composure. Comparatively, the Bhadraloks of Bengal started their mere mimicry through appearance to by embracing the tailored suits, waistcoats, and gloves to use them for their class aspiration purpose in the society. All the Victorian qualities of civility that are central to the imperial ideology were portrayed explicitly in this painting through the use of color and duality of appearance. By utilizing these qualities, the elite society of India negotiated their class and status in the society, incorporating power with style. The pressure imposed through the act of refinement is visibly clear in the painting, as the way a huge crowd is shown, which depicts the risk of disruption of civility at any point of the time in the post office, which did not get restricted inside the post office but emerged out to the psychology of the audience. Also, to mention that social boundary is created through the visual depiction of the fabric that were used for the different figures respectively. Hence, the concept of taste is not just sensory but also visually provoked in this painting. The painter did not use these notions accidentally to make the painting visually appealing. Rather, it was clearly intentional, as it can be used as a visual archive to demonstrate imperial hegemony, class aspiration, and moral regulation. Most importantly, the colonial power woven into the fabric of the commoners. This paper has observed the 19th century Victorian dining rituals in a broader matrix of imperial hegemony to carefully analyze the elaborate meals and the afternoon tea culture with completely codified table manners and etiquette. Such notions became the performative way of establishing power over the colonized and lower classes. The paintings, the afternoon tea, and the general post office were not only aesthetic artifacts but also visual archives that portrayed Victorian civility, where taste is cultivated, bodies are regulated, and class is distinguished. Through such bourgeois activities, the societal structure is modified into a model of refinement with authority. This paper foregrounds food as a mediating mechanism to make the research more significant with discourses of Victorian and post colonial studies. The dining rituals were seen as an active instrument in the production of bourgeois identity and imperial subjectivity. While these rituals promote civility and more regulation among the middle class people for the aspiration of class, but it also pressure to promote bodily appetite and cultural difference, followed by the notion of discipline and cleanliness. The hunger for class mobility was led by colonial mimicry and adaptation of the rigid power structure, and the politics of taste were inseparable from the power dynamics that were created in the society. The theories of Pierre Bourdieu and Homike Bhabha gave the paper the theoretical and analytical base. Taste is structured by habitus and functions as a maker of capital, which was vividly visible. Thus, Victorian culinary practices were not just mere preferences, but a performance of class to get the approval from the elites of the society. The concept of mimicry helped to explore how colonial subjects adapted the cosmopolitan dining codes for social mobility and distinction from others. The mimicry was marked by ambivalence that is almost the same but not quite. Thus, food is a relevant archive of history when the whole journey is traced from the Victorian kitchen to the colonial subject's plate, demonstrating how the motive of class aspiration, negotiation, and anxieties shaped the Indian society of the 19th century. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Piyasha, for the presentation. You touched upon many things, and combining the visual aesthetics and the edible aesthetics is itself a bit challenging. But nonetheless, thank you for your excellent presentation, and apologies for my croaky voice. I'm a bit under the weather. Uh, So I'm sure the audience will have certain questions for you. Do you have questions for Piyasha, who has made an excellent presentation? Okay. Yeah. You can directly unmute yourself and ask Piyasha a question directly.
Um, Thank you, Piyasha. It was a very beautifully made presentation, and your paper is also very well. I have
Thank you.
joined this meeting from the extreme west of the country, so I stay in Gujarat, although my name is very local. So my question is regarding the choice of the critics you have made, because I do understand this must be very challenging. But Homi Bhabha or Edward Said or you name the post-colonialist, now they have become very cliched. Number one, and there's hardly anything that is not touched upon in terms of the application of their theories. The coin of or whatever is in the run of the research right now is not so much in terms of post-colonialism, but colonialism. So this is just an idea for you. Maybe you can think about decolonizing or about the Victorian society in a decolonial world. This could be a probable topic for your research forward. But I really liked the way you have organized everything and you have put everything together. It isn't easy to talk about paintings, and definitely to talk about the visual arts, you need a certain knowledge of the aesthetics to even put that into practice. So, thank you.
Thank you for the valuable suggestion. I would really, really look up to that. And I would love to do more research on other critical topics and theories. Thank you so much.
Definitely, the onus should shift from a post-colonial angle to a decolonial practices and like situated in like living choices and embodied practices. Uh, Thank you for your suggestion. And do you have any other questions for Piyasha? So I was wondering, like, while you're making the presentation, since like the audience will need a certain amount of time to frame their questions, I was wondering, uh, do you think that this is the food practices or the food choices, and you pointed out rightly that it was a very subtle domination. Do you think it was a domination by pleasure because these food choices are being transformed across like colonial lines and people, the Waterloo, they're picking it up and they're in like they are creating an imperial hegemony. So it's more like a domination by pleasure, right?
Uh, I would love to answer this in a very interesting way because, as we are Bengalis, and we all know that Bengalis are open towards innovation new things and all sorts of experiments. And the colonizers, they might have brought these rituals with them because it was very common for them. But it became a common sense for us because we started appropriating these things very naturally after the Bhadraloks and the Babus of Bengal started liking the quote unquote uh, qualities of those rituals. Like the Babus and the Bhadraloks were always focused on the larger way of living, like with good things and even better aspects of life. So I think that is how it got adapted by the Bengali society and it became intergenerational.
Thank you for that answer. In the meanwhile, Garimas actually said a few amazing words for you. Amazing presentation. You blended all these topics amazingly. Do you have any more questions for Piyasha? The fun part about this presentation was that, like, whenever I was thinking like she should be touching upon these topics, and she directly touched on those topics. When you were like mentioning the fact that like they are hunting on the lands of the peasants and they are kind of enforcing their choices. So I was talking about like these visual aesthetics, the paintings, they also mask or kind of conceal certain labor histories. Those foods that are available on the plates, they have a background labor histories that is effectively being masked by the visual aesthetics of this painting. So thank you, and I really like your presentation. Do you have any more questions for
Thank you so
yeah?
much.
Uh, if nobody asks, then I'll ask her. Otherwise, I'll not
So definitely, ma'am,
harass
you
her.
can go ahead. No problem.
So, Tiyasha, since you spoke such a lot about Victorian aesthetics, um, could you also tell us certain theories of aestheticians or visual critics who may have put forth any of their views of the paintings that you talked about?
Actually, to be very honest, I haven't delved much deeper in this topic, but I'm open for researching more about these things. I would love to look into it.
Okay. Just one more, not a suggestion, but this is just for my information. I mean, I do understand most of you are from West Bengal, but is this
Yeah.
a group that is related to a certain um, university or a certain program in the university or a certain course?
I don't think this is associated with any program or any university directly. We have had participants from across India and even outside India from abroad as well. The only central guiding principle is that it tries to reinvent the thinking, discourse, and engaging with Victorian studies. And that is what we have been doing since last year. And in the coming days, we'll be bringing out a book on the proceedings from the like the discussion that we have had. And yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you
maybe,
so much.
ma'am, if you are interested in Victorian studies, you can come on our podcast and have a discussion on a topic of your choice as well.
Certainly. I look forward to it. Definitely. Thank you.
Those are very kind suggestions, and it is especially like very nuanced presentation, and that to coming at a from a student with an undergraduate level still has a lot of time and space to make a research in food studies. Thank you. So if there aren't any more questions, then we bid adieu for today. And thank you once again, Piyasha, for doing such a wonderful presentation.
Thank you so
Hopefully,
much
we'll be
for
seeing
giving me
you in
this
the book as
opportunity.
well. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much.
Hopefully, we'll be seeing you in the book as well. And in the meanwhile, we are also concatenating the second phase of this podcast. We are actually gathering resources and planning the technical know-hows and kind of doing new things, or at least we're trying to do new things. So stay tuned for more updates. And thank you everyone for joining. Thank you. Good night, everyone.